can see all the gaps here. That moves us on to the timber choice. Now I think I need to talk to my mistakes. Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video, we're going to be doing a project debrief video. I do these project debriefs on every video. Generally I do them up here, but I thought let's just get it out on video so you can see the process that I go through with every video or every build project. I also kind of do it with every video as well. But with every build project, just to have an idea of what went right, what went wrong, timber choices, all that sort of thing. So let's jump in here and get started. So the very first thing I think we should look at is the design. Now, I drew this design up on the PC, and there are a couple of things that didn't quite work. Now, I was aiming for this to be a knockdown construction, and to be honest, that wasn't the reality in the end, because these lower stretches had a little bit of a twist and warp in them, and that occurred because I had to leave them lying around for a while because it was raining out here and I can't film when it's wet out here. So they moved slightly, and because I had already done my half laps for the legs, I couldn't change it. There was no change in the design there. So I had to change it so it was no longer a knockdown, mainly due to that. But I did also realise that my design, if it was easy to take apart and put together, you wouldn't be able to lift the thing up. It would just collapse in a pile when you tried to pick it up. So my entire design was actually flawed there as a knockdown design. But as a design where you just put it together and glue it together, it's a perfectly simple design and it works really, really well in the final product. If you don't have a little bit of warping in these, doesn't really matter. If you're gluing it together, a little bit of twist, yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen and everything's acclimatized, which this project was. It was completely acclimatized. The timber had been out here for about 8 months, so it wasn't a failing of it acclimatizing to my conditions out here. It was just one of those things. It's the nature of Jarrah. And one other thing is I have a little bit of a failed design in how long the top is. I need to actually shorten the top on each end by about that much, bringing it a little bit closer to the bracing here, because if I push too much, like if I'm using it like, obviously I can't put enough force with my arm, but if I'm kneeling on it and using it as a saw bench, it has a little tendency when you ride out on this edge here for it to flip up slightly. Now, obviously, if this was a lighter design, it's going to be more of an issue because there's a lot of weight held in this. But ideally, I need to shorten each end by maybe 50 to 75 mils. So I'm going to work out exactly where my pivot point is and actually cut it back so I don't ever have that issue. I may even just take a little bit off one end because I'm thinking that I might like to put a small face vise on one end of this. That moves us on to the timber choice, and it was nice thick timber. I want to add holdfast to this at some point. I had it on hand. It was fully acclimatized. It was perfect for what I wanted for a nice solid bench. These stretches are a nice design to it when they're cut off here. It's a solid design that looks great once it's actually all glued together and finished, especially in the Jarrah. Now, the issues, or most of the issues that I encountered in this build was due to the Jarrah itself. I've not worked with big hunking pieces of Jarrah this big before. And what I didn't realize at the time of purchase before I started filming this was that this Jarrah has an incredible amount of tension held in it. So every slight little cut on it and it would just pinch shut on the saw plate. If you see my footage here, I kept waxing it because it kept jamming the plate, and the wax was the only way I could keep it freely moving. And as we know, if there's not a free kerf when you're hand sawing, it pinches the saw plate and it guides the saw away from where you want. So even if you do right techniques like I did, chiseling back, lining up on your lines, running nice and straight on your lines as you get down to more depth. So if you're staying shallow, it's not such an issue. But as you get down to more depth, you'll actually see it sort of pulled the saw, even though it was a back saw, and it pulled the angle. Likely, I think I saw in there, it kind of flexed the saw plate ever so slightly. And yeah, and I mean, some of you might be saying well, you should use Japanese saws. I have used them in Jarrah before, and with that tension in there, it's even worse because of how thin the saw plates are. And the first time I actually used one on Jarrah like this, it snagged the tooth and snapped it off. So Japanese saws are not friendly with unfriendly timber like Jarrah. It just causes the same problems and makes it worse, and then you snap teeth, which is not good. So that was the main issue I had, and that's why the joints went out and things like that. Now, along with that, let's look at the joinery. So let me just put this down and bring in, and we'll have a closer look. So we used half-lap joinery here, and to be honest, the half-lap joinery didn't work for the knockdown design, but the design which we ended up with and it gluing together, it works very well. Now we can see this is where I ran off my saw line here. So you can see once again, gaps. Now, for the most part, my gaps are on the cross stretches and not the uprights, and so the glue held on the legs to the up part of it, but all of these were really gappy on the small ones. You can see all the gaps here. It's a big gap here. You can see that this didn't seat down as far as I wanted because it started jamming here, and in the end, I kind of just put up with what it was, and we glued it together, and there's still enough contact that, you know, it's glued together nice and tight. It's not going to fail. So it's kind of a foolproof joint method that even if you do make a mistake, it's not really the end of the world and it doesn't stop it from working. The other thing when it comes to the joinery attaching that tabletop that worked incredibly well was these hand-chiseled pocket holes. They worked amazingly. Chiseling across the grain of the Jarrah worked perfectly with a nice sharp Japanese chisel in this case, any nice sharp chisel. And I had really no issues there because we were working with small severed fibres, and that just worked flawlessly, as you could see in the video when it was done. Absolutely no issues there, and that was like the most flawless part of this whole project, along with finishing. The finishing came up perfect as well. So now that I've looked directly at the actual product that we ended up with, the joinery, the design, and the timber choice, now I think I need to talk to my mistakes. First one, glue. I was originally going to use the glue bot. This dried up in here. It's not meant to dry up in these, but it's completely dried up in here, so I can't even use this anymore. I don't think I can even clean it out, so I'm going to have to get a new one of these. I do like them, but it's a little strange that the whole lot has sort of gone off and dried up inside the glue bot during winter, not even my hot months. So I opted to try and use this one, and you might be able to see there, this nozzle's actually blocked up. It's completely dried shut, and so the glue wasn't coming out of there, and to be honest, I probably need to get rid of the rest of this glue because it was slightly set up, and that's another reason that it blocked the nozzle. But then, when I was doing the glue up, I stupidly took the top off like this because I was rushing. It was a very silly mistake. I started tapping glue everywhere, and the video doesn't do justice as to just how much glue I got everywhere with that. That was a very silly mistake. I felt the glue was sort of drying up slightly because it was, and so I was trying to rush, and I didn't have a brush nearby, and I didn't get a small amount of glue, and so there was a whole bunch of factors, mainly because I was filming as well, because then I got glue on my hands, and I couldn't stop, and I couldn't touch the camera because of glue on my fingers, and then sort of rushing against the clock to glue it up. So that was a very silly mistake looking back at it now, and in the future I need to be better prepared and maybe make sure that my glue is not setting up before I decide to start a project. So that's definitely the number one takeaway that I take from this is, yeah, glue. Next one, edge jointing these boards. And as I was edge jointing them end to end, I was just going end to end, leveling them out, as you do, and I wasn't watching the sideways movement. And as you saw in the video, and you can see it right here now, it's like 1.5mm out of square due to this Melbourne tool company jointer, and this blade moving even when its lever cap is fully done up. Now, That's kind of a real big design flaw, or maybe it wasn't quite tight enough. I really don't like these Norris adjusters for actually holding the blade. Particularly on this one, it just doesn't work well. I have seen them, and on my shooting board it has this style, the Veritas shooting plane, sorry, and that worked perfectly there because it's got a larger surface area, but this just being a straight pin design doesn't work very well. My blade moved. I know this one's prone to moving. I didn't check it. So I finish edge jointing end to end to end to end. Alright, it's nice and flat, and then, 1.5 mil out of square sideways. Oh, why is that? Check the blade. It's moved. So, it is something you should always do, is check your blades, especially between one board to the next, because I did the first board, and that was out ever so slightly, and I didn't really notice it. Moved on to the second board, and I completely stuffed up. So, if you are working with planes, edge jointing, okay, the normal bevel down style doesn't tend to move, but if you're using these low ones with Norris ones, especially ones on the cheaper spectrum, I would suggest that you pay close attention to what you're doing and don't do what I did and waste a whole extra half hour of trying to square it up and extra width on the tabletop and the legs, which just didn't need to happen if I was actually paying attention. Then we'll move into when I was cutting it, and this happened. Oh no. Yeah. That, once again, was due to tension in the timber as I was cutting it. I was using this one here, this Robert Lee tenon saw for that one. It's got a decent curve. It's fine for all other jarrah, like when I was doing my cabinet door up behind here. I use this to cut things off. I use it in jarrah all the time. Just like my Spear & Jackson one. I use these tenon saws in jarrah all the time and don't normally have a problem. But as I mentioned, this one had a lot of tension held in it. And so, as I was sawing through, waxed it up with candle wax. Just like this. Wax the whole lot up. It allows it to slide, and if you look closely in the footage, you can actually see that wax was melting really fast. The saw plate was generating, and it had an incredible amount of friction on it, particularly when I was doing that. Not so much when I was doing my half laps, but when I was cutting this to length. And so I was putting a little bit of downwards pressure on that edge when I was doing that. Sawing, got to probably a slight weakness in the timber. I wasn't really pushing as hard at the point that it happened, but a little push. Oh no. And it tore it out. So it's just really something to be aware of, and try to avoid timber that's got a lot of tension in it. I had someone comment on my video. I will put the comment here for you so you can see it, where he was mentioning that it's because it's kiln dried or fast dried timber, tension tends to be held in it, which is not something that I'm really that clued up on, but it's interesting to know that that is the case. And yeah, so you might want to be avoiding store-bought hardwoods like jarrah if they've got really twisty grain and things like that. They might hold a lot of tension in them. Softwoods can still have a lot of tension in them. I've ripped cutting pieces of pine where the saw plate gets jammed and things before, and that's just something that can happen. So it's something to be aware of. And once again, timber choice. Working a difficult timber does have unforeseen consequences. Yes, I was able to repair them, and some people say if you can repair the mistake, is it really a mistake? Did it really happen? Well, it did happen. I caught it on film. You can see it. You know it happened. I know it happened. So it's just something to be aware of. Maybe instead of me pushing down on that board in review, which I've done before, is you get a screwdriver or a piece of metal or a little wooden wedge to tap the kerf open so it doesn't jam on your saw plate, which is something that I've done before. I know it. I just didn't think about it in the moment when I was rushing to film, as I always end up doing. Although I try not to, I always end up rushing to a degree when I'm filming, not thinking of things, thinking about the cameras and other things that I'm doing, which I don't normally do if I'm if I'm not filming. It's just something that I keep churning over in my head, how I could make a silly mistake like that. But I'll learn from this, and that's what these reviews are all about on these things. What went right, what went wrong, and to be honest, the main source of issue with this project was my timber choice. And I knowingly went into this project knowing that Jarrah's not the easiest to work with hand tools, but I've worked with it quite a bit, and I thought, I can overcome my issues. And while I still got the project together, we still had a lot of issues, a lot more issues than any other project that I've done on the channel to date. And you get to see them all, and hopefully learn from my mistakes if you're working with a hard timber that tends to be short grain and tends to have a lot of tension held in it and things like that. So it is a little bit of a cautionary tale that you really need to watch your timber choices. So I hope you enjoyed this little insight into my processes that I go through with every project, looking at timber, joinery, did the design work, and then other factors. What I did right, what I did silly, was there something else I could have used that could have done a better job, all that sort of thing. And so in my case, pine would have done a better job for this, but I didn't want a pine bench. I wanted something thicker. It's difficult for me to get a lot of different sort of American or European species of timber here in Australia at a reasonable price. And this was a fairly reasonable price, and that's why I chose it. I'm sure there are other options out there, and some of you here maybe in Perth, where do you get your other hardwoods? I'd love to know, because I've not found a suitable supplier at this point. Most of my timber just comes from the big box store, salvage yards and things like that. So if you've got some ideas, let me know. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe down below. Sound off in the comments. Is this a process that you do after every project? Do you have time to sort of think about it, even if it's only a few minutes up here thinking about the project? Do you do an overview and go through what you did right, what you did wrong? I haven't always done it, but it is something that I've started doing in the last couple of years, and although it didn't stop me making a mistake in this particular instance, it'll help to prevent me make these mistakes with some of this timber in the future. I've still got some more of these boards here, and more projects will be made out of them, and so I know what to look out for and avoid next time when working with it. So, if you want to see another great video, do check out the video down here, which is actually the build video for this bench. Bye for now.